The smell of disinfectant still makes my stomach twist. It takes me back to that hospital room. White walls, humming machines, and the sharp sting of something too clean, too controlled. I remember lying there, pale and swollen, watching Daniel pace near the window. He looked so tired, so devoted, his hand running through his hair the way he always did when he was anxious. I thought, he's carrying all this for both of us. When the doctor came in that morning, he spoke in that calm, professional tone people use when they're hiding worry. Something about complications. Something about signing additional consent for the anesthetic. I nodded, barely hearing, too dizzy from medication. Daniel reached for the clipboard before I could even lift my head. "I'll take care of it," he said softly, pressing my hand down against the blanket. "It's just standard forms, honey. Go back to sleep." I wanted to ask what it was, but his voice was so gentle. The kind of voice you trust when the world is spinning. I let my eyes close, and the faint sound of a pen scratching against paper became part of my drifting dreams. I didn't know it then, but that sound, that tiny, ordinary sound, would echo in my head for months afterward. When I woke up from surgery, everything felt off. The light hurt my eyes. The doctor smiled, but it didn't reach his face. And when I asked, "Is everything okay?" he hesitated, just long enough to make my pulse quicken, then said, "Yes, Mrs. Hanley, everything went smoothly." But he didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at Daniel. Daniel squeezed my hand and smiled down at me too quickly. Too perfectly. "See? You're fine, baby. I told you everything would be fine." His thumb brushed over my palm, but it felt rehearsed, like comfort delivered on cue. I brushed it off. I told myself I was paranoid, loopy from drugs. I told myself to be grateful. The days that followed blurred together. The hiss of oxygen, the beep of machines marking time, the dry taste of fear that I couldn't name. Nurses came and went, always smiling politely, but there was something in their eyes. Pity, maybe, like they knew something I didn't. One night I couldn't sleep. The morphine had worn off, and the pain pulsed with every breath. I heard two nurses whispering by the curtain. One of them said, "Does she even know what he signed?" And the other murmured, "Shh, keep your voice down." My heart started racing so fast I thought the monitor would give me away. I kept my eyes shut, my hands still, pretending to sleep. The words repeated in my head like a heartbeat. What he signed. What he signed. When Daniel came the next morning with his usual smile and coffee cup, I couldn't look at him the same way. His kindness suddenly felt strategic. "How are you feeling?" he asked, setting the cup down beside the bed. "Tired," I said flatly. "What did you sign, Daniel?" His hand froze midair. "What?" "At the hospital. The doctor, the nurses, they said something about forms you signed." "What was it?" He laughed, a small, dismissive laugh that used to charm me but now made my skin crawl. "It's nothing you need to worry about. Just standard stuff, I told you." He leaned over and kissed my forehead, but I turned away. "You always worry too much," he said, and the way he said it, not tender, but controlling, told me everything. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that it was the meds or the fear or my mind turning shadows into monsters. But that night, as the hallway lights dimmed and the machines whispered around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been taken from me. Not physically, something deeper. A kind of safety I'd never get back. When the doctor came for my discharge papers, he barely met my eyes. He gave Daniel the clipboard again. "Just sign here, Mr. Hanley," he said, avoiding my gaze. And when I tried to reach for the pen, Daniel gently pushed my hand back. "You're still weak," he said. "Let me handle it." That's when something snapped inside me. Not a loud break, more like a quiet tear you can't repair. I smiled, nodded, let him sign. But inside, I was memorizing every gesture, every word, every look. At home, I couldn't stop replaying those moments. The way the doctor's eyes darted to Daniel. The way the nurses whispered. The way he'd said, "It's nothing you need to worry about." He started taking phone calls in the garage. Spending more time running errands. And when I asked questions, he'd change the subject, talk about my recovery, make me soup, touch my hair. It all felt choreographed. One evening, while folding the blanket on the couch, I found a hospital folder tucked beneath the cushions. My heart leapt, but before I could open it, Daniel came in and snatched it up with that same too-fast smile. "Oh, that's just insurance stuff. You don't need to look through that." I nodded again, pretending to believe him. But my hands were trembling behind the fabric. The fear that had haunted me through my illness was gone now, replaced by something colder, sharper, suspicion. That night, as he slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the pulse in my throat. I thought about the papers, the doctor's silence, the nurse's whisper. I thought about how easy it is to trust someone when you're too tired to fight, and I made myself a promise. When my body healed, I would find out exactly what Daniel had signed, because my heart might have been weak, but my mind was waking up. And something inside me was no longer afraid. My body was healing, but my trust was dying. And soon, I'd discover just how much he'd taken when I wasn't looking. There's a particular quiet that settles over a house when something's wrong. Not loud or dramatic, but heavy, like the air itself knows a secret. That's how it felt when I came home from the hospital. Everything looked the same. The same framed photos. The same coffee mug on the counter. But it felt rearranged somehow, like someone had been in the room and moved things just enough to throw me off balance. At first, I blamed myself. I was recovering, fragile. Maybe I was just paranoid. But then I noticed the missing mail. Daniel used to leave everything in a neat stack on the kitchen table. Bills, letters, junk. Now every envelope seemed to vanish before I saw it. He said he was handling things. I wanted to believe him. After all, he'd stayed by my side through everything. He'd cried in that hospital room. He'd fed me soup and tucked the blanket under my feet when I couldn't move. What kind of man does that and still lies? Apparently mine. He started taking more calls, hushed. Short ones, always ending with, "I'll take care of it." Once, when I walked into the room, he slipped his phone into his pocket so fast I heard the fabric tear. "Business stuff," he said. "You don't need the stress." That phrase, "you don't need the stress," became his shield. He said it whenever I got close to something real. Then came the dinner. His sister Marianne had invited herself over. She'd always been the type who smiled like she was in on a joke no one else got. She brought a bottle of wine, her perfume thick enough to choke the truth out of the air. "So good to see you up and about," she said, slicing her steak with surgical precision. "Daniel's been such a saint through all this." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, he's been attentive." She sipped her wine, eyes gleaming. "Well, at least now the house won't go to waste." The fork slipped from my fingers, clattering against the plate. "What did you say?" She looked up, feigning innocence. "Oh, I just meant, with all the uncertainty, it's good that everything's settled." For Daniel's sake, I didn't hear the rest. My ears were ringing. The room tilted slightly, as if the ground itself was reacting to her words. "The house?" After she left, I went into the kitchen, my hands shaking. Daniel was rinsing dishes, humming under his breath. That same off-key hum he always did when he was hiding something. "What did Marianne mean?" I asked quietly. "About the house not going to waste?" He didn't look up. "You know her. She talks nonsense." "Daniel?" He froze. Slowly, he turned to me, water dripping from his hands. "You're overthinking again. Don't start this. Not while you're still recovering. Recovering. Always recovering. Always too weak to ask the right questions." That night, after he fell asleep, I got out of bed. The floorboards creaked like they were warning me, but I kept going. In the study, the moonlight pooled across the file cabinet, glinting on the metal handle. My heart pounded in my throat as I pulled it open. Folders, bills, insurance papers, and then the hospital logo. The folder he'd hidden from me. My hands trembled so violently I had to sit down. I opened it slowly, afraid the truth might be loud. The papers were crisp, official, full of words I'd read 1,000 times before in my career. Transfer of ownership, medical authority, spousal consent. But this This wasn't consent. This was control. My name was printed neatly at the top, but nowhere was there my signature. Only his, line after line, his scrawled name, confident, practiced. The section that chilled me most was the clause marked permanent. Permanent authorization. Permanent transfer. Permanent loss. The house was no longer mine. My medical rights, my insurance, even my pension, all rerouted through him in the event of long-term incapacity. Except I wasn't incapacitated. I was sitting there breathing, reading, realizing. I could still hear that sound, the pen scratching in the hospital room. His voice saying, "It's just standard forms." Honey. The way I'd trusted him, half-drugged and vulnerable. The way he'd looked at the doctor afterward, he hadn't been protecting me. He'd been preparing to erase me. When I confronted him, I didn't shout. I couldn't. The words came out slow, like stones being lifted from a grave. You signed everything over to yourself. He looked up from his phone, startled. What are you talking about? The hospital papers, the property, the insurance. You transferred everything. His face went pale, then flushed red. You were dying, he snapped. I had to take control. You didn't even know your own name half the time. I did what needed to be done. I stared at him, tears burning behind my eyes. You didn't take control, Daniel. You took everything. For a moment, the mask slipped. His eyes flicked away down to the floor. Guilt, or maybe fear. I couldn't tell anymore. Don't be dramatic, he said finally, his tone softening, manipulative. We're a team. Everything I did was for us. For us? My voice cracked. You sold my safety like it was paperwork. You sold me, he sighed, shaking his head. You don't understand how bad it got. I thought, no, I interrupted, my voice trembling. You thought you could get away with it. Silence. Just the hum of the refrigerator between us and my heartbeat pounding in my ears. That night, I slept on the couch, clutching the folder to my chest like it was proof I still existed. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks in the plaster. They reminded me of veins, spreading, breaking, inevitable. The humiliation was unbearable. It wasn't just betrayal, it was annihilation. Every signature was a piece of me, handed over without my knowing. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, watching a version of myself that no longer legally existed. In the morning, Daniel acted as if nothing had happened. He made coffee, kissed my forehead, asked if I wanted toast. I watched him, this man I'd loved for 15 years, and realized I didn't recognize him at all. He'd smiled the same way at the altar, the same way in the hospital, the same way when he'd lied to my face. And for the first time in our marriage, I didn't smile back. I knew I couldn't undo what he'd done, but I could make him face what he'd taken. And somewhere inside me, under the fear, under the ache, a small fierce spark began to burn. It started quietly, the kind of quiet that hides movement. Small, deliberate, dangerous. While Daniel thought I was recovering, I was collecting pieces of my life he'd tried to scatter. Receipts, copies, emails. Every night after he fell asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with the soft hum of the refrigerator for company and a notepad in my lap. My handwriting looked shaky at first, the letters uneven from the tremor in my hands. But the more I wrote, the steadier they became. I didn't tell anyone, not even my sister. People like Daniel thrive on appearances, the smiling husband, the selfless caregiver. I knew if I said anything too soon, he'd twist it. He always did. He could turn cruelty into concern with just a sigh and a soft, "You're imagining things." But numbers don't lie. Paper doesn't lie. It took weeks before I was strong enough to leave the house on my own. My first trip wasn't to the grocery store or the park. It was to the notary's office, the one listed on the forms he'd signed at the hospital. The place smelled like old carpet and ink. The clerk at the front desk looked up when I walked in. "Can I help you?" I swallowed hard. "I'm looking for the notary who handled a hospital authorization for Daniel Hanley. About 6 months ago." He frowned, flipped through a logbook, then nodded toward a door in the back. "That'd be Jason. He's in today. Jason looked barely 30. His tie was crooked, his expression polite but uneasy. I told him my name, told him the date. When he pulled up the record on his screen, I saw the recognition flicker across his face. Guilt, too. I remember that one, he said quietly. Your husband said you couldn't sign because you were sedated. I was awake, I said, voice steady, and I never gave consent. He looked down. His hands were shaking. He said you'd signed earlier. That it was just a reaffirmation. I swear I didn't know. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I stared at the grain of the wooden desk, the fine lines in the surface, and thought about the pen scratching in the hospital room. How that sound had haunted me. He lied to you, I said softly. And you helped him do it. He winced. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hanley. Don't be sorry, I said, standing up. Be ready to tell the truth. I left with a copy of the notarized documents and a recording of our conversation. My fingers were cold, but my pulse was hot, strong. For the first time in months, I felt powerful, like the world had tilted back toward balance. From there, it all unraveled faster than I expected. Hidden bank transfers, property sale listings, even an email chain where Daniel discussed liquidating joint assets before final medical clearance. I printed every piece, labeled them, stacked them like ammunition, and then, one night I sat in the living room, rain tapping against the windows, the house soaked in blue shadows. Daniel came home late, coat dripping, muttering about traffic. I waited until he hung it on the rack before speaking. Sit down, I said. He blinked, surprised. What's this about? Sit. He hesitated, then sank into the couch. I stayed standing. My voice was calm, too calm. I spoke to the notary. His face went still. I know you forged my consent, I continued. I know about the transfers, the property sale, the insurance withdrawal. I dropped the folder on the coffee table. It landed with a sharp slap. You didn't just take control, Daniel. You stole my life while pretending to save it. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Finally, he said, You're blowing this out of proportion. You were in no state to— Stop! My voice cracked like thunder. Stop making me sound crazy for seeing what's right in front of me. He rubbed his face with both hands, exhaling hard. I was trying to protect us. I didn't want to lose everything if I what? Died? I snapped. That's the part you were counting on, wasn't it? The room went silent except for the rain. His hands trembled slightly, and for once he didn't have the right words. I stepped closer. You said you'd take care of me. You did. Like someone takes care of paperwork. He looked up at me then, eyes wide, pleading. We can fix this. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding, I shook my head. It's already fixed. I filed a fraud report this morning. I took a deep breath. And divorce papers. He stared at me as if he hadn't heard right. You did what? I met his gaze, steady. You signed away my name, Daniel. My home, my rights. Now I'm signing away you. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I picked up the folder, tucked it under my arm, and walked toward the door. You can't do this, he called after me. I turned, my hand on the doorknob. You already did, I said softly. You signed away your marriage, too. When I stepped outside, the rain hit my face. Cold, cleansing, alive. Each drop felt like something washing off me. Fear, shame, dependency. The storm didn't scare me anymore. In the weeks that followed, there were court hearings, statements, long nights filled with doubt. But every time I started to falter, I'd think about that hospital room, the sound of the pen, the way the doctor had looked away. And I'd remember why I couldn't stop. One afternoon, after everything was finalized, I walked back to the hospital. Not for treatment, for closure. The halls smelled the same, disinfectant and memory. I stood outside the operating room doors, listening. Somewhere inside, a machine beeped steadily, rhythmically. I smiled. My own heart was beating in time with it, strong, deliberate, unbroken. I touched the scar beneath my shirt. It wasn't ugly anymore. It was proof. Proof I'd survived more than surgery. Proof I'd come back from erasure. Never hand your trust to someone who hides behind love. Real love doesn't need signatures to stay. And as I walked out into the sunlight, I whispered to myself, my name is mine again. What would you do if this happened to you? Subscribe for more emotional family stories.